Our first presenter is Nic Scala, who presents his project, The Evolution of Educational Writing.
For many years, I struggled to find my niche as an academic writer and continuously failed to meet expectations when it came to writing. I was always considered an average writer at best and always wondered why that was. What criteria was I evaluated on? This led me to frame my research question around my struggles as a writer in high school compared to my success in college. What is the difference between high school and college writing? And what effect do the differences have on the development of us as students? I also focus on the role of FCAT Writes plays in the development of a student's writing ability and whether or not it truly measures the level of one's writing aptitude. Interestingly enough, my development of this research project began in my freshman summer in ENC 1101. We were asked to write a paper on our writing process and how it was been influenced throughout the years. While I was writing this paper, many questions arose, such as the one previously listed, but it was not the appropriate place to discuss them. When we were told that we would have the opportunity to choose our own research projects in ENC 1102, I instantly chose this subject matter and began doing primary and secondary research. I found that there is a very large conversation going on about this topic I desire to discuss, and I feel that I can add quality input into this discussion. I will be adding specific personal experiences that relate to my research question and then discussing the effects that each experience had on my development as a writer. Deborah Brandt brings up the point of literary sponsors and the role they play in the development of a student writing and what type of learning they are exposed to. This is a very interesting point when it comes to academic writing because the sponsors has all the power to dictate the way we write. I see the FCAT as a sponsor of writing and that it dictates a certain format in which one has to write in order to achieve a passing grade. Brandt also brings up the point that the interests of the sponsor and the sponsor do not have to converge. Sponsors nevertheless set the terms for access to literacy. For this research paper, I have conducted a self-case study. I analyzed my past experiences as a high school writer compared to my college writing experiences and the role that FCAT has played in the development as a writer. As part of my case study, I specifically chosen 3 examples that I analyzed while trying to answer the questions above. First, I have chosen to reflect upon my writing experiences during the years of school in which the FCAT Writes was the main focus in my writing classes. Next, I will be focusing on the transition from FCAT Writes being the centerpiece of writing classes to literary criticisms and more analytic writing papers. Finally, I plan on focusing on the effects of emotion and how that plays a role in the type of writing produced by students. The first area of focus I decided to reflect on during my self-case study was my experience as a writer during the years of school in which the FCAT was the main focus of my writing classes. As I was reflecting upon my experiences, I found some very interesting results. I found that from the 4th grade all the way up until my sophomore year in high school, the FCAT Writes was the main area of concern during that time period. Every day, class consisted of a practice FCAT writing simulation, as well as a homework assignment that involved writing to a prompt. Even after the years of preparation, I was only able to achieve a 3 on the FCAT Writes, which really baffles me. What does a 3 mean? Am I a bad writer because of it? I also found that every teacher I had would teach the test regardless if they thought it was benefiting me as a writer or not. After analyzing my writing career during this time period, I found that the FCAT was definitely hindered my ability as a writer. I was trained to write a specific way for a test that supposedly gauges my ability to write, when in reality, the second I walked into my junior English class in high school, the habits I had developed as a writer became irrelevant. Reflecting back on my literary sponsors during this time period as well, I found they ultimately played a negative role in my development simply because they taught me that writing for the FCAT is the only way to write, and that is the way it had to be done. After finding these results, I realized that almost 7 years of my educational career was dictated by one standardized test, and once it was done, so was that style of writing. I was left with a sense of no direction. How was it that all of a sudden, someone is supposed to drop what they have been so influential in his or her writing experience and suddenly pick up a new form of writing? I realized that FCAT Writes was not put in place to benefit me as a writer whatsoever. It was really put in place to benefit the teachers, school district, and state, also known as my literary sponsors. It all comes back to what Brandt says about literary sponsors and how they are not doing it to benefit you. There is always a driving force called money that motivates the sponsors. All of these literary sponsors that are supposedly there to better my academic career reap the benefits of every passing grade on the FCAT. As a result of every passing grade, the teachers earn more money in bonuses, the school receives more money from the school district, and the school district receives more money from the state. We students are left with a numerical grade from 1 through 5 denoting how good of a writer we are. But what does that numerical value mean? How does it benefit me? The truth is, it means nothing. The same student who receives a 5 has the same benefits of the student who receives a 1. The number that everyone had worked so hard to achieve vanishes the second we move to the next grade. Since I received a 3 on every FCAT writes I ever took, does that make me just an average writer? I disagree. I don't think one's writing ability can be judged based off a timed test in a very pressure-filled environment with a prompt that I have very little interest in. For the second part of my research, I reflected upon the transition from the FCAT writes as the focal point of my writing classes to a more analytical style of writing. I found that during this phase of my writing career was where I really began to struggle as a writer and developed a strong disliking for writing. I asked myself, why was this time period so difficult for me? Then I realized transitioning from a 5-paragraph essay that was required for the FCAT writes to writing 5 to 10-page literary criticisms was a huge shock to me. Never before had I been exposed to such expectations, and I think this is what ultimately led to my struggles as a writer. Once again, throughout my analysis of this time period, the FCAT writes seemed to play an influential role and develop me into a writer I am today. Clearly, the FCAT had a negative impact on my transition into a more analytical style of writing due to the fact that I only knew of a 5-paragraph essay that mostly consisted of insincere opinions and made-up facts. Perhaps one of the most interesting results that I found was when I entered my first semester as a college student, things began to take a turn for the better. All of a sudden, I began to produce quality writing that was really valued in the discourse community that I had become a part of. After finding these results and comparing them to my results I found during my high school career, many questions arose. In fact, these really sparked the idea for my research question. What is the difference between high school and college writing? Why was my writing suddenly valued much more in college than it was in high school? Did my literary sponsors play a large role in the transformation of my writing ability? Based on my findings, I've come to the conclusion that the purpose for my writing in high school is very different than in college. Every literary criticism that was assigned was based off a book that the entire class was forced to read. As a student who really struggled with the reading of Shakespeare, for example, it's no wonder my literary criticism was not as good compared to the other students who might have enjoyed the reading of Shakespeare. What I'm trying to get at is literary criticism was not assigned to have students add valuable input into an academic conversation. In my opinion, it was assigned to make sure that students did the reading and how well their paper turned out reflected how well they comprehended the reading. By comparison, in my first semester as a college student, we were given a topic to write about that we could run with in any direction we wanted to as long as it was analytical and added something to an academic conversation. The difference between high school and college writing is seen in what each institution values. High school values a finished product that can prove students understand the reading they were assigned, compared to college, which values analytical writing that adds to an already existing academic conversation. My literary sponsors allowed for me to develop an idea and run with it in a way that was not allowed in high school. Every single person in my ENC 1101 class had the same prompt, but we were all able to attack it from different angles. That is what separates high school and college level writing. In high school, everyone was forced to write about a topic that was so narrow and only focused on one aspect of the book we were performing the literary criticism on. Ultimately, this is what led to my mediocrity as a high school level writer. Can I blame my literary sponsors for my failure as a high school level writer? Yes and no. It depends on what level of hierarchy of literary sponsors you decide to look at. Blaming my teachers would be wrong because they were given a curriculum at the beginning of the year and forced to follow it. However, I do believe the state, which sits on top of the hierarchy of literary sponsors, can be blamed. They must reconsider the goals they want their students to achieve. If the goal is to have every student read a laundry list of books by the time they are finished with high school, they are doing a great job. But if the goal is to allow the students to develop an analytical stance on topics that truly mean something to the student, then things must change. For the final part of my self-case study, I took a look at the effects of emotions and the environment and how that plays a role in the quality of writing I produce. Again, the first type of writing that I took a look at were my experiences taking the actual FCAT writes. I found that leading up to the FCAT writes, I was very nervous and tense. The test-taking environment was very intimidating. The proctor would read from a script while the entire class sat there anxious to take the test. My emotions ran especially high when the proctor began to read off the various ways your test could be invalidated and repercussions if in fact that did happen. During the actual test, the time limit was a huge cause for concern and raised the stress level even higher. Finally, once the test was over, it was as if a ton of boulder was lifted off my shoulder, and at that point the results didn't matter to me. I was just happy to be done with the test. Next, I considered my emotions and environment while I was writing my first literary criticism during high school. My emotions for this type of writing differed tremendously from that of the FCAT writes. While writing the literary criticism, I was frustrated rather than nervous. I was frustrated that I could not seem to get a flow in my essay and was at a loss for words most of the time. I remember an entire weekend would be dedicated to completing a literary criticism essay due to the fact that my frustration would overcome me. Although I was frustrated throughout the entire writing process, I was in a very pleasant environment. I was in the comfort of my own home with access to snacks and a break whenever I felt necessary. Although the final product rarely ended with the grade I would have liked, my environment offered a much calmer and relaxing writing experience. The final writing experience I looked at during my self-case study was my first college paper. I remember during this particular writing experience, I had a sense of uncertainty as to whether or not I was on the right track. Being that it was my first college paper, I was nervous and wanted to make sure I performed well. One factor really stands out during my writing process for this paper that is the availability of office hours. After going to my professor's office hours to discuss my paper, I gained confidence that I never thought I would have in my writing ability. After sitting down with my professor, he was really impressed with my writing, which really boosted my morale. After talking to my professor and finding out that he really liked where I was heading with my paper, I opened up as a writer and performed at a very high level. As for my environment, I first started writing in my dorm and found that it was not as good writing environment due to the plain white walls and the feeling that I was in a jail cell. I found that moving to the library offered me a much more focused writing environment. This section of my self-case study really made me think about the effects of emotions and one's environment when writing, and proves that a positive attitude and the right writing conditions can really make all the difference. Why is it that the FCAT is taken in such a strict environment, which allows for no breaks and has a time limit constantly breathing down your neck? If the FCAT is such an important test that gauges one's ability to write, shouldn't we be placed in an environment that benefits one's writing ability? For a kid sitting in a room full of students waiting anxiously to take a test with a scary proctor reading off the rules of the test in front of the class, it is very intimidating. I think the results on the FCAT would be much better if students were given the entire day to take the test with the option to get up and walk around and eat a snack in order to clear their minds. Writing is supposed to be an enjoyable experience. You should not have to feel rushed and pressured during the entire process because you know you only have 50 minutes to write an essay on a topic you couldn't care less about in the first place. One main factor in my experience writing my first college essay that allowed me to achieve a high quality of work was the access to office hours. Why is it that in high school, I am not allowed to take my paper to my teacher and have a one-on-one conversation about my paper? Implementing a system like this in high school would benefit the students tremendously and allow for a better product. After comparing all three writing experiences, I have realized that each one has their positive and negative effects on me as a writer. Moving forward, both my writing environment and emotions will play a huge role in how and where I sit down and write. After completing this semester-long project, I have learned not only a lot about myself as a writer, but also learned a lot that needs to be changed in the high school writing curriculum as well as the FCAT writes.
Next, we'll hear from Amanda Wimmersberg and her project, Ending the Cycle of Frustration, How I Overcame the Hindrance of Writer's Block. Amanda?
I've struggled with my composing process for as long as I can remember, but I never really addressed that problem until my freshman year in college. My composing process was not hindered by grammar or how to structure a sentence, but by what was known as writer's block. There were many instances where I would sit in front of a blank computer screen for hours at a time, unable to produce any fluent thoughts, and frankly, I didn't know why. I would write a sentence, then erase it. I would try another sentence, and then scratch that one out too. It was a never-ending cycle of frustration, and there was always a part of me that wanted to find the assured solution that would end the dreaded case of writer's block for good. There are many inhibitions that can be discovered within one's composing process that would explain why they might experience writer's block. So I started looking for secondary research. I found that the main causes of writer's block include work apprehension, procrastination, perfectionism, evaluation anxiety, fear of failure, or following rigid rules of writing. Needless to say, the causes of writer's block are multiple, but among those causes, the most prevalent were perfectionism and procrastination. Many students don't know this, but a perfect writing piece does not exist. The determination to write a perfect piece could feasibly lead to a cognitive block. However, procrastination works in a different way. When a student waits too long to begin an important writing assignment, they are forced to write on a deadline. The student may experience writer's block due to emotional realm or fear of assessment since they are feeling anxious and pressured to complete the assignment. Then, the student feels as if they are not able to produce anything to the best of their ability. As I was examining more secondary research, I found that there are many references had some of the same solutions that students could possibly use to overcome writer's block. After one knows the cause of their writer's block, they can then find a suitable solution to use. Free writing, questions that stimulate thinking, encouragement, completing an outline before one writes, talking out loud and writing down those thoughts, eliminating all distractions, and changing one's surroundings are all solutions that could possibly help one overcome writer's block. Every researcher believes that at least one of these solutions could help a student, but there is also a chance that none of these could help. It was also said that if a solution doesn't work the first time, try again. Many researchers found that performing the solution more than once increases the chance of benefiting the writer. So I took this secondary research and I started to develop my own research. When one is writing, staring at a blank page and being unable to produce fluent thoughts are some of the most unsatisfying moments ever, I would know. About 25% of my primary research was surveys and interviews to see how other college students were affected by writer's block, if at all. Then the other 75% of my primary research was dedicated to my self-experiment, in which I chose 7 different techniques to perform on different writing assignments that can conceivably help me overcome writer's block. I tried it all: free writing, talking out loud and then writing down my thoughts, making outlines, changing my surroundings, eliminating all distractions, listening to quiet music, and making a post-it note outline, which was actually recommended to me by my professor. For this segment of my primary research, I would set a stopwatch for the total time that it would take me to complete an assignment, and then I would set a stopwatch for when I was experiencing writer's block. Every time that I performed a technique, I would make sure that I recorded several different aspects that I found most important. I recorded the technique that I was using, the assignment that it was performed on, how long it took me to complete the assignment, the conditions, such as if I was alone or not, the estimated time that I would stop. Then I would reflect on how I believe the technique worked for me, such as if it did or did not help me overcome writer's block. After analyzing the data that I finally collected from the survey that I conducted, I found the results to be rather interesting. There were a couple questions that I asked on the survey where my attention gravitated towards. One question asked was which of the following hindered them most as a writer: sentence structure, writer's block, grammar, vocabulary and spelling, or any other which they had to specify. Out of the 31 total respondents, 14 chose writer's block. Another question that I asked the respondents was what the term writer's block meant to them. Not having the motivation or inspiration to write and not being able to produce consistent or flowing ideas were the most popular answers, with over 16 responses each. The last question that I asked was how respondents try to get rid of their writer's block. There were a total of 17 responses to the choice of going to do something non-academic, such as going out to eat or going to the gym. As for interviews, the first interview that I conducted was with Professor Lanier, who was my ENC 1102 professor at the time. I started off by asking what writer's block meant to him as a professor, and his response was, "There is no such thing as for me." He went on to say that writing is a process and that he works through writer's block because it's just part of that process. However, then Professor Lanier commented, "If we are a victim of writer's block or if we suffer from writer's block, then there is something going on in our process that isn't working for us." That really made me think about how to go about my self-experiment. Then I interviewed 2 of my peers, and they both said the exact same thing. It means you're trying to write a paper, and you get stuck because you can't think of anything else to write about. Oh, and it's the worst thing ever. Nevertheless, I learned something from every interview that I went through, and I'm hoping by now that everyone is wondering if I really did overcome writer's block, and the answer to that is yes. After 14 weeks of trial and error, I finally figured out that there were some techniques that actually helped me. If you look behind me, and the results will show you that yes, my research project was very time-consuming. Writing an outline, changing my surroundings, eliminating all distraction, and listening to music didn't really help me overcome my hindrance of writer's block, but it was worth a try, right? Talking out loud and then writing down my thoughts was really time-consuming because I didn't have the right software to really complete this technique the right way, but it still worked. Free writing partially solved my problem because I wasn't forced to think a certain way, and in the end, I found the winner, and ironically, it was the technique that was recommended to me by Professor Lanier. The Post-it note outline was my savior, honestly, and I rarely experienced any writer's block, and it was the best feeling in the world. And let me tell you, I still use it till this very day. After finally completing my primary research for this project, I realized that I wasn't alone when it comes to experience writer's block. The results from the survey pointed out that majority of the respondents do experience writer's block. I've also learned that the term writer's block can have different definitions depending on the person and the type of writer they are. The interviews showed that different points of views from Professor Lanier, who studies language and writing on a daily basis, to my peers who commented that writer's block is usually always a hindrance to them when they write. There were many points made during the interviews, and some were very different from one another. The most important notion that I can take from this project is that I'm able to overcome writer's block. By performing my own self-experiment, I was able to find a few techniques that actually worked for me, and that I will be able to use for the rest of my life. I found that these techniques of free writing, talking out loud, and then writing down my thoughts, or creating a Post-it note outline could all work for me and almost completely rid me from the hindrance of writer's block. My initial goal was to step into this conversation to seek guidance on how I can overcome my writer's block. The results from my primary research have shown that I have accomplished that goal and that I should take that knowledge that I have learned and add to the conversation of overcoming writer's block. Depending on what is causing writer's block, the writer should be able to find a solution that will benefit them in the long run. Yet, there are other ways to help one overcome writer's block. Lawrence J. Oliver argues that strategies should not be considered a panacea for writer's block, but they have helped unlock the words and ideas of many students. Therefore, they should be among the tools that teachers should have at their disposal when assisting students with writing problems. So, should teachers play a greater part with a student, like when they are experiencing writer's block? There are many techniques that can be used to overcome writer's block, but should these techniques be taught in schools? Growing up, I was never really taught any techniques to overcome writer's block, and sometimes I wasn't even encouraged to try and get past it. I believe the most important aspect of this research paper is that teachers should become more aware of the writing issues students face. Studying how to overcome the hindrance of writer's block could benefit education nationwide.
Our next presenter is Kamisha Hasan, who will be presenting her project, Digital Literacy and the Making of Meaning, How Format Affects Interpretation Through the UCF Library Search Interface. Kamisha?
It's really an honor to be a part of this event. So my paper, Digital Literacy and the Making of Meaning, How Format Affects Interpretation Through the UCF Library Search Interface. And I know the title is kind of a mouthful, but frankly, what I talk about is really a very intuitive concept at its core. We use all sorts of different communication methods on a daily basis, especially nowadays. And the mediums that we use to communicate have a strong impact on what we say and how we say it. I mean, a text message, for example, looks nothing like an email or a letter or even the content in, say, a phone conversation. For example, if I sent Amanda a 2-paragraph text message, she probably would block me because that doesn't make any sense. Nobody wants to read, unless you're going to break up a text message. I don't think that's a good idea either. But on the other hand, if I did send her an email that said, OMG, TTYL, she would probably think that's rude. I don't know if she would or not, but anyway. Yeah, or at least she would send back like a WTF. Like, nobody writes that. That's not how you write an email. So it's not just the context, though. It's like I'm saying, the medium. And the context, for example, if I had sent her the same exact message in a text instead, it would have been perfectly normal, right? Okay. What changed isn't the context. It's the medium of communication, and that's what I'm focusing on. The text message, for example, instead of the email, or phone call instead of letter. There's so many examples. Clearly, the different mediums we use govern the kind of message we send and how we interpret it, the meaning we make from that message. So we see how mediums themselves impact how we convey a message, as well as how we interpret and receive it. But what about other contexts? What about other things besides sending and receiving messages? Something where you are the only audience for the information, like, for example, a search, like how I search for information, like in Google, and how I interpret this information that I've received, those search results. Do mediums also affect that? That's the answer my research really sought to determine, and the short answer is yes, it does. But before I get to that, I had to scale down this research because obviously it's a huge area. I chose the UCF library and the search function on the library's webpage. Really, what better place to make a comparison between traditional kinds of literacies and just like, browsing books, asking a librarian, and newer digital means like a search, like the library search, for example. Because of the nature of the research, though, and the vastness, I went with rhetorical analysis as my method of research. Basically, what that involves is analyzing the interaction between something like a kind of text, for example, in my case, the web page, and its audience, you guys, the users of a web page. I also interviewed a librarian, but it was really insightful. I don't know if I'll be able to get to that. What I was able to conclude, though, based on the research, was really eye-opening. I found that, yes, just like in our first example, medium really does impact how we deal with information, how we understand it, and even how we use it. Because the expression of your purpose also in a search is so limited, all you have is a keyword or a couple of keywords. Tell the computer, hey, this is what I want to find. You'll get so many results back, and you know that most of it is not really relevant to what you're looking for. And so you have to filter those out. And in the process, instead of trying to understand more generally about an entire topic, you get pushed into specific and very, very specific targets. I guess to frame that in a few words from my paper, and I'm referring to the search here, I say, though inadvertent, the search page encourages this practice, the superficial pursuit of a random subject to complete a task, rather than an in-depth pursuit of a specific area of inquiry to gain a fuller understanding. Essentially what that is, in a digital setting, you're overwhelmed with options and information, which mostly or oftentimes is not relevant, and you know that, and you have to filter that out. You end up saying, okay, let me just find out how a solenoid, for example, works in a car engine, instead of figuring out how the entire motor works, which is probably what you were looking for in the first place. It's kind of like talking to Sheldon. Anyway, the medium in this case is manipulating your search. And we know that already, yes, but it's also manipulating what you decide to get out of it, what you end up learning from that search, what you not just find out, but also what you decide to learn more about. So it's manipulating your access to knowledge. Now you're probably asking yourself, okay, so why is this so important? Because like I said in the beginning, it is a very intuitive concept. Even if you haven't thought about it, if you think about it now, it's something that would seem very normal. So that's a great question. Why is this so important? And the reason why is because it impacts our access to knowledge. I'm a student, and you guys mostly are students, and I'm in college to gain knowledge, to access knowledge. I would want to know if something is interrupting that process for me, or something that is, interrupting that interaction for me to gain knowledge, impacting my access to it. Mediums impact our access to knowledge, how we get our information and from what portal we get our information, like the search, influences how we understand it and use it as well. That also means that mediums have and exert a lot of power. The reason why this is also so relevant is how much of our life and our learning is now done digitally, and using computers, smart gadgets, phones, that's how we interact with our learning environment. I mean, I have courses that are on the web all the time. And even researchers agree with me, I guess. Because we do so much of this online, we need to know that we're getting the most information that we can, the most knowledge out of the mediums that we use. Computers, smartphones, whatever that we do use as a medium to get to knowledge, we need to know that it's giving us as much as we can get. I mean, we all go to the library, but a big percentage of us, I guess, go there just to, use the computers, 400 or so computers there, not to specifically browse books or ask librarians or do any of the typical things you would do. I'm sure all of you are amazingly adept at making really awesome searches, but I'll admit it, I'm not so amazing at it, and I know I'm in good company. I see a lot of people like me there. It's that medium, the search portal in this case, that exerts power over that knowledge that we have access to, and ultimately the meaning that we make of that information. I think some of you will hear this and say, gosh, is digitization of the library, for example, a bad thing? Let me just take this opportunity to say, no, it's not a bad thing. Get scared about that. What my research is saying is that digital environments are new and different, and they require new and different skills to interact with them. New ways of interpretation, even manipulation that maybe we are not necessarily already equipped for. So that attention is very important. That's what we need to update. We need to update our own software, to work better within those environments. And also, I think importantly, we have to update those environments as well to work better with us. Thank you.
And next we're going to hear from Cullen Fitzgerald, who is presenting his project, Engineering Majors in Writing. Is it the instructor or the student? Cullen?
Thank you. During an internship I held in a past summer, my supervisor would joke about the quality of writing of the engineers working on projects. She said that the biggest issue an engineer can have is their ability to communicate what they're doing to those not in engineering, both verbally and in writing. Her suggestion to me was to work on my writing skills, as I am comfortable talking to people, which made me wonder, if these engineers had writing courses intended to prepare them for professional applications, why was their writing seeming so poor? Were these individuals just bad writers? Did they elect to not take certain courses? Or did their instructors fail to provide proper instruction? The first place to look into is the scientific thought process. Students often view scientific knowledge as a collection of facts, formulas, and problem-solving methods that require memorization and are separate from their everyday lives. However, researchers from a wide range of disciplines have documented the considerable intellectual accomplishments of children, adolescents, and adults in out-of-school settings with mathematics and literacy that often contrast their poor school-based performances. This information shows that creating a connection between academics and everyday life increases the likelihood of success. A similar tool for success is engaged writing, which, in the sciences, not only promotes students' production of new knowledge, but it also allows students to develop a competency in the specific practices of the field. Writing also allows students to become participants in their science community. Despite the substantial evidence that writing can be an effective tool to promote students' learning and engagement, the practices of using writing as a teaching tool are still not widely implemented in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, or STEM, disciplines, particularly at research universities. Bernard Madison tackles this issue of the separation of writing and quantitative reasoning in his article, If Only Math Majors Could Write. He notes that science, math, and engineering majors have been neglected the kinds of classes that would provide the contextual uses for their knowledge, in the lack of humanities courses required. He gives examples of how quantitative reasoning can strengthen the writing argument, as well as the general literacy of people who pursued humanities majors. Madison's purpose of writing this article was to showcase the benefits people can have if they were to be more quantitatively literate. His writing gives the inference that if a science, engineering, or, per the title, math major could write, they would have a greater ability to pass along the data that they have pursued to those on the outside. This makes me wonder how students of the quantitative sciences have been affected by not having as many writing courses available or required. Strong writing skills are incredibly important for successful engineering careers, and these forms of multiple literacies are needed in the workplace, where working engineers have to communicate constantly with many modes. These can range from collaborating on cross-functional teams to presenting business cases to superiors, and even explaining their work to the general public. Students' needs for multiple literacies has been recognized by instructors and scholars, while most textbooks only focus on the most basic literacy skills. While many engineers spend more than 40% of their work time writing, a discrepancy comes between the education and the actual practice of writing. Engineering programs have been responding to the feedback of their graduates' employers by requiring more technical courses or more writing within the curriculum. Christopher Wolf's argumentation across the curriculum emphasized the importance of writing in engineering and found the engineering and sciences to nearly always require argumentation in the writing assignments. Wolf shows writing skills to be much more important to engineering majors than they are perceived. However, the gap between what is being taught and what is expected still exists. In the study, Perceptions of Memo Quality, a case study of engineering practitioners, professors, and students, Nicole Amare and Charlotte Brammer wanted to understand why there is such a massive gap between what employers expect in a memo and what new members of the workforce create when they both have received similar, if not the same, education on what a memo should and should not be. Amare and Brammer surveyed professors, students, and practicing engineers with a set of sample memos to collect their comments on the memos. Their results showed that the professors' comments were more focused on the style, while the engineers were more focused on the content. The engineers clearly showed a preference to having enough information stated directly and in the appropriate words. Their study shows that having an understanding of the proper writing techniques is appreciated, while giving the information as quickly and simply as possible is a much greater concern. Amare and Brammer's study leaves me the question, why is there such a huge gap between what professors are instructing and what is expected in the professional application? The first thing to consider is what the professors view as the experience students have with writing assignments. Rafael Calvo and Robert Ellis investigated what kind of impact different feedback methods have on students with written assignments. Their investigation provides the experience students have with professional writing assignments, which should reflect what professors know of the students' writing experience. What they found was that students were in two distinct groups: cohesive perception, in which students tie the feedback back to their development, and fragmented perception, where the feedback is only to help complete the assignment that the feedback is for. Calvo and Ellis's study shows that there are students that use the professor's comments to aid their writing development. This means there are professors that understand that their comments directly affect how the students perform written tasks. To provide a more practical manner of practicing scientific writing, John Ladens and Barbara Olds wrote to explain why publishing in scientific and engineering context courses are needed for graduate programs. In their article, they performed interviews with practicing engineers, and all of the interviewees emphasized the importance of communication and writing skills because an increased ability in writing and communication had a direct link to an increased rate of career advancement. There were even reports of students inquiring about a course for these very skills existing, a clear sign that this was in dire need. Ladens and Olds produced a great outline for a potential course for graduate students. However, why not offer such a course for undergraduates as well? Or better yet, why not require such a course of undergraduates? Doing so would save the students time and energy by gaining this knowledge before they go into a graduate program or the workforce. It would also make the professors in the graduate program's time better spent, because the reports they would receive from students would be significantly more easily read and require less time from the professors. For this project, I first conducted a survey of engineering students at UCF's main Orlando campus, and I also had an interview with Thomas Wright, a professor in the Department of Writing and Rhetoric, instructing a class on writing and communication in the scientific community. The survey conducted showed that of the 27 respondents, 21 students had only completed the Gordon Rule requirements of ENC 1101 and 1102, or the College Board's AP course equivalents. In the remaining 6 students, 3 had completed a technical writing course, 2 completed American literature courses, and 1 had responded with a technical presentation course. Over 80% of the respondents had completed these courses over a year before this project was conducted, with nearly a third of this group having completed a course within 3 semesters. One of my concerns was if the student or the instructor was the cause of the trend, so I also asked the students about their score in the latest course. Over 95% of the respondents had scored a B or greater in their course, and none had failed their course. During our interview, Professor Wright's comments on the subject followed a singular idea. Engineers can write, they just need to have a reason. Professor Wright made his opinion clear by saying that most engineering students can already explain things well within their own discourse communities, and that engineers have the drive to use writing, use speaking, use whatever they can to be able to get those ideas across. He went on further to say, I think I met maybe one engineer in the job who wasn't really able to write well, and even this individual was able to compensate through verbal communications. My survey shows that these students are primarily focused on their math and science requirements, because only 22% of the respondents completed a writing course beyond their Golden Rule requirements. And over 80% of these respondents had completed them over a year prior to the survey. A year, even a semester, without completing a math or science course would be unheard of for an engineering student. So why is the medium that is used to share data completely ignored for any time? Professor Wright went deeper into the relationship engineers and writing have, which followed the data gathered from the survey. The engineering classes that students have to take when going through that major take up so much of their time and effort that they don't put as much of their own time into learning to write well, as Wright said. So these students were missing on some material, as Professor Wright has experienced with most students lacking the ability to explain the materials without using their own lexes and genres. And in his professional experience, he was frustrated that freshly graduated students take about a year or 2 to fully understand how to properly write professional documents. What I've been able to gather shows that, given a stimulus, engineers can and will write spectacularly. However, newly graduated engineers would struggle with writing in the workplace for about the first year because there's some miscommunication between what the students are being taught and what professional engineers are expecting. Could this difficulty be avoided by requiring more writing courses or integrating more writing in engineering courses? Engineers need to write in the professional world, and most engineering students are not nearly getting properly prepared for this need. It is important for engineers to be able to perform the hundreds of different calculations and experiments consistently and completely in their work. However, the completion of these tasks are worthless if they cannot share and express the findings or requirements. As stated by Professor Wright, fresh graduates tend to take time to understand how to professionally communicate, which is an understandable frustration because the purpose of their education is to prepare them for the professional world. This leads me to say further research into the writing engineers are expected to complete in the professional world is needed. This follow-up could example what new graduates have difficulties with in the professional world, investigate how long it takes them to successfully remove these difficulties, or investigate what is being done, if there is anything being done, by education institutes to remedy these issues with students. Thank you.
One more time, I'd like to personally thank all of our presenters here in this morning's panel. There's no time for questions and answers, but I'm sure that our panelists are more than happy to stick around for a few minutes if anyone has any individual questions that you'd like to meet them and ask. So thank you very much for attending this panel, and we hope to see all of you around campus.